Now we have a very special guest coming all the way from Georgia Tech in Atlanta. He's been developing augmented reality experiences for almost 25 years. Unbelievable. He's seen it all. And today he's actually going to talk about bringing augmented reality development to web browsers so that billions of people can enjoy it. Join me in a warm welcome for Blair MacIntyre.
So I actually started doing AR like in '91 when I was a grad student up the street at Columbia, far up the street. Steve, my advisor, Steve Feiner, will be here this afternoon. Today, Ori asked me to come and talk about this. I'm going to go through this relatively quickly just because of time. So over the last 4 years, we've been experimenting with using web technology for augmented reality, and we've done a bunch of different things with that and looked at doing things in a bunch of different ways. What's particularly exciting and what I want to highlight today is that basic web technology in browsers like the mobile browsers on Android and so on are finally getting to the point where you could create at least simple right now AR apps using a stock web browser with some caveats. And so I'm just going to highlight some of that stuff. Okay, so just to give you my perspective on some things, I'm not going to go into this too much, but I'd be happy to talk to people at the breaks or whatever about it. I actually think there's some really big questions that are kind of the elephants in the room of augmented reality that a lot of what we think about when we're looking at these SDKs and tools aren't really being addressed, and I kind of highlighted the two that I think are interesting and bold. Right now, most AR apps are not particularly useful, let's just say that. They're on aggregate, if you take all of the AR apps you might have and put them together, it might be this sort of really cool collection of things if you had them on a head mount together, but individually they're not there's no killer app yet. So one of the things that I'm really interested in pushing, and I really want to kind of push the phone and OS manufacturers to think about, is finding ways to pull all that content together into one space. I mean, imagine if you could open your phone app on iOS or Android or Windows and see all of the AR content from all of your apps together, right? That's going to start making AR a more viable technology for a lot of people. And I mention this because that motivation is what started our work on this Argon browser and Argon app ecosystem project back in 2009. So there's a second version of Argon that we have in the web store, iOS app store right now, called Argon Isotope, in the tradition of Canary and other kinds of beta versions of browsers, since Apple won't let you say something's a beta. And what Argon 2 is, you could think of it as a web browser that happens to expose some more complex technology. So in our case, we've got Qualcomm's Vuforia embedded in the browser and exposed into JavaScript. And this lets us do AR apps using WebGL and CSS, although there's a caveat with WebGL because Apple doesn't actually let you ship that yet, but in our own build, we can do this. More interestingly, it's a platform that we're using to explore this idea of overlaying multiple AR apps in one space. So in Argon, instead of web pages being separate, if they're AR enabled, they overlap, and you can have independently written, completely different UI AR apps overlaid and displayed at the same time. And this raises all kinds of interesting research questions that we care about. What are the UIs for that? How do we provide tools to developers to help them manage this situation? And that's all I'm going to talk about with respect to that long-term vision. Argon.js, which is the JavaScript framework for it, we're working right now to make this a cross-platform framework, so it'll work in mobile Android, it'll work on the desktop, it'll work in our browser, and we want to get it working in other domains so that you could hopefully start writing AR apps that work on a variety of platforms and are more complex than the kinds of things you could do with a lot of the cross-platform tools. We're using GitHub right now. It's all private, but our goal is to open source this using a really permissive kind of Apache license so that other people can use it. Okay, so Ignoring all this, technology for AR is improving. This is a slide I took from the sort of the relevant technologies we need for really creating next generation AR at a low level are improving. This is a slide from Kronos' APIs. And so there's a lot of work going on to deal with things like OpenVX, which is open framework for feature tracking and doing sensor fusion across all devices and worrying about the low level details that let people create next generation AR apps. Unfortunately, a lot of this stuff isn't yet available on the web, but some of it is, right? So if you go and look at web SDKs right now, WebCL lets you do GPU programming in web pages. WebGL lets you do OpenGL, complex 3D graphics. There's a bunch of specifications from the World Wide Web Consortium to let you get location, device orientation, do complex spatial audio. WebRTC is starting to let you pull live video into web pages so that you can overlay it. Lots of work going on in the open source community on toolkits like 3.js, which is what we use, which is an open source 3D graphics library for the web. Some attempts at doing marker tracking in JavaScript, but they all are pretty low performing, shall we say. And then there's other projects. I mentioned Famous because it's a library that re-implements how 3D layout works in web pages, much more efficient and so on. So there's a lot of stuff going on. And a lot of this stuff sort of deals with this end of the spectrum, with the high-level OpenGL, OpenCL, 3D rendering, and so on. Eventually, more and more of the things we need to do high-performance AR will be available on mobile, on desktop, and it's not actually that far away. So part of the reason why I highlight all this is if you're a developer and you're working in a domain that actually really would benefit from the flexibility of the web, right? You don't want to ship an app, maybe you already have a complex website, and it would be cool to just have some AR content on it. We're getting to the point where you might start looking at that and thinking about that. So this is a screenshot. I didn't actually, unfortunately, create a video of this because it was hard to do in my bedroom at home with an Android phone, of a simple little Android app one of my students, Ray Chen, made. So this is WebGL, animated 3D graphics, using orientation and geolocation. So a typical geolocated, non-vision tracked AR app, and it's running at 60 hertz on a Motorola X1 phone. Running the stock Chrome, in this case, browser. So that's getting to be the point where we could start doing some interesting things. Okay. Other people, I mentioned Rob Manson's Kickstarter. If you're interested in seeing what other people are doing, trying to raise money to make his open source JavaScript SDK real. So you could go look at that if you're interested in helping Rob. At a high level, I think there's a spectrum, and if you're thinking about web technology and AR, there's this spectrum from, I want to just use the pure web and not do anything special at one end, and that's what Rob's interested in. The little demo picture I showed you, that's where that sits. It's just all running in a browser. Up at this end to things like Cordova, PhoneGap, which use HTML5 JavaScript as a programming set of tools, but generate apps. And then in the middle, things like Wikitude, which Martin talked about, Layer, Genio, use the web and the web ecosystems in different ways, but their apps have a lot going on underneath. So Martin mentioned they have their own 3D rendering engine, and that's kind of necessary right now. I mentioned that we use WebGL, but you can't ship a WebGL-enabled app on iOS yet. Apple has WebGL in the browser. It's there for iAds, and you can do like a little 2-line hack in your code to enable it, but you can't ship that. But that's changing, and now that Microsoft, against all odds and surprising everybody, released WebGL in the newest Internet Explorer, most of the Android web browsers have WebGL in them, so it's a matter of time till iOS does as well. Argon, our browser, is a little bit farther along to the other end. We have technology like Vuforia in it and video in the background and so on, but it's still you're still writing everything using mostly the same techniques you would do for the web. And our goal, as I said with the framework, is to make it work both in Argon and in normal web browsers. I was going to show a video using the same AirPlay technology, but decided to just film it while I was sitting in my seat over here. This is just a simple little app, completely trivial. There's a yellow cube. that's geolocated off in that direction. And then there's Vuforia. And as you can see, that the Vuforia stuff runs very fast. This is running in a web browser. That content is a WebGL, red WebGL cube with a CSS div on top of it, both rendered in the same 3D scene graph and rendered at the same time as the geolocated content. It's a very straightforward app of the sort you would do in Unity, for example. Just to prove it, this is the code for that app. This is a web page. There's two, and this is completely unreadable. Not terrible. So there's two little folded over things that I'll show you, but it's 98 lines of HTML and JavaScript. And let's see if that, oh, I can't. Really? You're not going to let me use the mouse. OK. Thank you, Keynote. Is there a way to actually do this? No. OK, so fortunately, I put line numbers up here. I'll just talk very loudly. So basically, this is just a standard web app. We're including a script, which has our Argon script, adding some listeners for custom events like when Argon is ready, when a Vuforia data set is loaded, and then creating, telling the document to load the stones, the same stones data set that Patrick showed, and when it's loaded, doing a bunch of stuff. And then we have two functions that create the content. So the little yellow cube is created like this. We create a GeoObject at the top, create a bunch of 3.js. We'll create a simple cube in 3.js, add it to the scene graph. I actually went and got my longitude, so you can get your current location as a variable, got it, subtracted some small amount from the north-south axis, and displayed it. So if you think about what that did, this is, I think, a pretty reasonably straightforward amount of code to accomplish that, which is the point. Similarly, this, which you can't read as much, this is the code for what goes on when the stone's target is loaded. At the top, we see that there's a stone's target, check it just so it doesn't crash, and then create one OpenGL cube and one CSS div, put them in the appropriate place on the target, much like Patrick was doing in Unity, and display it, and that's it. Okay, so that's the whole thing. Trivial app, small amount of code. So as I said, so you can go and download Argon. We have this SDK publicly available. There's documentation on hanging off our website, which I'll put a URL up for, and play with it. Argon right now is still a custom browser. We can hopefully port it to Android soon. KitKat fixed a bunch of the problems we were having before, but it's still not pure web. Okay, so the last thing I want to show you before I stop are just some little videos. Again, this was student Ray has been experimenting with what you can do with the stock Android browser, and I think this is pretty interesting. So he created a web page that when you load it, so this is on Chrome on his Nexus 7. It's got an image in it. It's got a movie in it. Standard web page. That's an AR panorama in WebGL, and this is a live AR view. And these are all just in divs. So when he taps on that div, asks for permission to use the camera. This is using JSAR Toolkit, so it's slow but surprisingly fast, shall we say. So there's a little animated 3D model running on a marker, stock Android browser, and it still is embedded in the web page. And I think, to me, this is exciting because I really believe that not only do we need to be able to get at all our AR content at once if we want AR to be useful, but we really need to stop thinking about AR apps, right? We need to start thinking about AR as a way of displaying things like movies, like 3D graphics, like images, when that stuff should be in the world. And we need to integrate it with the current technologies we use, in this case, the web. And I can put AR in a div and use it, or I can not. And so if you think about complex real-world things like maintenance and repair and so on, AR is one modality. Okay? I'll let this play. I'll let this play just a few seconds. So this is the other one. This is a WebGL panorama. He's actually in the room that this panoramic image was taken. And this is sort of another demo that he was working on with a construction company of being able to inspect the world. So there's a whole bunch of 3D objects in this panorama that he can tap on and inspect and find out information about. And again, this all integrates back to a back-end web server using the exact same kind of web programming techniques that you'd use to create a web page, except now it's 3D and, in this case, kind of AR. Okay, so that's it. I just wanted to go through at a very high level to talk about this sort of idea of using the web and say that, you know, the standard web browsers are very soon, I think, going to let you do sort of interesting augmented reality. Apps like Argon let you access things like Vuforia and so on now and create more high-performance AR apps while you're waiting for that to happen. Okay? Thank you.